right, let's dive back in and talk about forms. Anybody here use forms for class or credit or journal for anything? What forms do you use?
A lot of employment contract terms for foundational learning.
Oh, okay, so foundational learning forms. Great. Other applications for forms? So you used a will form. Victoria, you remember? You were searching the database?
It was embarrassing when Danielle thought that was like, wait, I'm pretty sure she was
Okay, fair enough. How did you find the forms?
Narrow by the time you're looking for. So I think they had flavor or flavor.
Then what'd you do?
Well, I was drafting a non-compete clause, so then I used the search bar. At that point, I just did non-compete.
And when did you do this? Non-compete, or did you fill out?
I did that. Yeah.
And then we've got these all over the place, so you just choose one, maybe narrowed it.
I think I narrowed it at
Asia, Europe. So any reason you went to Westlaw rather than Google?
No, I tried to put it on the page, and I just so many things that I thought were unrelated. It was almost too broad. So I just thought if I could go and work on narrow, it would be easier.
Well, good. I can go home. Danielle can. Google is great. It stinks for forms. Most of the time. I'll show you a couple of examples in a little bit. I would try, like anything, I would try it. I would spend maybe 5 minutes, not that long, I think. Because Google usually just Lexis, Westlaw, both pretty good for forms. I don't know if those of you who look for forms found this, but I find sometimes as I was sort of scanning through the quick search as we were talking about, sometimes finding, you see your terms, you see the results in various forms, but actually finding a form that you're looking for, and again, it depends on the form, can be a little bit of a challenge. I'm assuming you all agree that finding a form for something you have to draft is a good thing. I don't have to convince you that using forms, whether on Lexis or Westlaw, Google, or wherever, is a good idea. One thing you may not know is wherever you wind up working, they may have a form bank. And they may have a form bank that they actually would really prefer you to use because they found that this particular version of form works well for their particular practice. So before you start searching on Lexis, Westlaw, Google, wherever, ask whomever seems appropriate, librarian if you've got one, managing partner, associate that you've become friendly with who's been there a year or two. Is there such a thing? Are there examples to work from? If not, then you would want to go to the more generic forms that you would find, Lexis, Westlaw, wherever. Another strategy for using forms, for finding forms rather, is perhaps to get to know a couple of good form sets, either for your jurisdiction or ones that you've had success with, because again, for instance, if we wanted to find a form for a complaint, of course we'd want to find that in New York, and litigation civil trial, even if we went to document field, So commencement of amended complaint, amendment of complaint. We might be able to scroll through here and find it, but you don't always find what you're looking for, even though it seems pretty straightforward, right? So, as I started to say, one tip is to find a couple of sets that are useful, depending on the area of law. Also, again, jurisdiction. One way of doing that, we have not talked for a while about research guides. I'm back here in the library homepage, and we have our library guides, and to click through here, we have general research library, and what we have are a couple of different guides to help you find form sets. So here's just regular old forms, general, and then in which you would find major sets, subject specific, and then we have another guide specific to New York, and there are lots of guides out there pointing you to forms in lots of different areas. You'll actually find references to forms you may remember in the annotated code. So again, not that how Danielle did it or how I just did it plugging in terms is bad. It's just when that doesn't work, don't spend a half an hour insisting that you have to find that complaint because it's got to be in there somewhere. Use some of these other tricks, whether it's, I would go to a guide, honestly, unless I knew of a set. There are also sets, I mean, we're talking about litigation more, although actually drafting non-compete is more transactional. There are good sets for that as well. One of my favorite, Rabkin and Johnson, we've already seen some Amjur pleading and practice forms. Again, that's more litigation. A whole bunch out there. Another trick, I'll show you, start here on Lexis. It's a trick, but really we've already talked about this in lots of other areas. Valesio. Again, narrow to your jurisdiction, and then perhaps to your, if we were looking for a form of complaint for a contract action, I'm limited to New York here. I might try contract complaint. And one thing I like about Lexis, it actually gives you the form type. And this is where the one trick that I keep on alluding, or a technique, I shouldn't call it a trick, that I'm alluding to, is don't be afraid to look at the titles and make an educated guess. So forms for vendors, forms of pleading for the state of New York. So it's a whole big number, don't worry about the numbers. And again, they get pretty specific. But now that I've limited, what I might do is go to, I just click on one random, I know this isn't the one I want. Go to the table of contents, view the table of full table of contents. And it jumps me down to where I am, whatever random form I chose, but if I just sort of scan through, it's kind of a long one, but see, maybe just if I just want a basic complaint, skeleton form of complaint, third party. So again, the technique of using the table of contents, even when you're starting from a point in the treatise or in the form set that isn't of interest, can get you to where you might need to go. Finding complaints or form complaints turns out to be quite tricky, so you almost need to go a different route than just sort of the straightforward, as we started to see on Westlaw. I mean, these are pretty close. Commencement of amended complaint, again, it's not quite what we want. So what I might do again, this Lane's Goldstein litigation forms, that sounds promising, and again, go to the table of contents. go either to the chapter 1 or, see, there's a whole chapter on complaints. Because it turns out the chapter brought me through amendments. I'm not ready for amendments. I just want a regular old complaint. And then going through, and you can always use Control F. But for whatever reason, keyword searching forms sometimes is fine, sometimes it's tricky. So just remember some of the techniques that we've been doing for a while. Again, focusing on a particular title that sounds your particular area. And again, be flexible. There's lots of different ways, like we're talking about malpractice and negligence and torts. They're all kind of related, so maybe the form set will be in one of those or one of those 3 areas. Kind of went through Westlaw already using their form finder. Yeah, selected New York Form Finder as a favorite. By the way, those favorites on Westlaw are really nice. You just sort of highlight the form finder, you click on the star. So that's how I created that. If there were an area that I practiced in a lot, I might highlight that as well. I guess, bless you. So using the form finder, they've made it a lot easier, but again, with some techniques for narrowing can make life easier. So table of contents. Search within results. And you'll find some forms, like I think complaint is tricky to find. Another form we get asked about is engagement letter, which is what you saw me searching up there on Lexis. As you can see, engagement letter for individual client for estate planning. So that's great if your client is involved in estate planning, but if you're not doing estate planning, it's not going to help you very much. So again, that's where narrowing by a particular type of practice, or actually we don't want to narrow it to estate planning, we want more general. So form for the civil practice might be good for that. So I think not a whole lot to say about, much more to say, standard techniques that we've been using the narrowing, table of contents, finding a particular title. The only thing I will add before I will circulate a workshop on form finding, just to give you some practice, is, as I mentioned, I think Google, I agree with Danielle, Google was not very fantastic. So if we were looking for that complaint in New York, this is actually for filing complaints with the Attorney General, having nothing to do with complaint form. Yes, maybe we want to add the word form, how to file a complaint. So there's an example. It's a lot of, not the complaint to initiate a lawsuit, but the complaint with a particular agency, which are obviously 2 different animals entirely. So there's an example. Google doesn't work so well. An example where Google might work is that other sample engagement letter. And the moral of this story is, I would spend like less than 5 minutes on Google, but you can succeed. And as always, when you're on the web, evaluate your source. The New York Bar Association sounds like a reliable source for me. To me, I hope you agree. So that's something that I would feel comfortable with. The other moral of the story is that actually bar associations, and since you've all said you plan on staying in New York, I might poke around the New York Bar Association website, with or without Google, to see if I can find a form, especially more basic forms like an engagement letter, which is basically what you all will be sending out to clients when they decide to hire you. You will have a formal agreement of engagement. They're sometimes called retainer agreements, depending on who you ask, which of course is going to make a difference because you'll find it much more easily using engagement letter than retainer agreements. The other thing you just want to be aware of is that depending on what your area is, there are some forms that are actually in the statutes. So there's certain forms in which are, I'm trying to think of an example, that you may, that's provided for by the statute, and you will get a reference either through the annotated code, or you'll see the form after the text of the statute. So again, just be aware and keep your eyes open. Like I said, happily this is more of a doing learning exercise than a me talking exercise, since I've done that enough. So I'm going to pass around a workshop asking you to basically go on Lexis to a particular resource, and if you have trouble finding the resource, let me know. It's a good review on doing that. Likewise on Westlaw, and then I'm asking you just generally to find a form using Google, using Lexis generally, but use a different, using Lexis and Westlaw generally, but you find a different resource than you want the resource you find in the first question. And yes, I'm speaking in the abstract. It'll make a whole lot more sense, I think, when you see the actual workshop. Sounds like and I have to tell you, even though I kind of zoomed through this rather quickly, knowing that there are forms out there and knowing that there are form sets out there is an incredibly powerful tool. Maybe that seems obvious to you all, but actually when I started practicing law, I did not know that. My first couple of months would have been much easier if I did.